In this video, we're going to take a look at installing this remanufactured alternator for the Nissan Frontier 2003 year model with a VG33E engine. The first thing we want to do when you purchase your remanufactured alternator is you want to make sure you compare it side by side with the one that you're removing from the Nissan application. So the first thing we want to look here is we want to make sure we have our terminal for connecting the ground. The ground wire will connect here or here. Then another thing we want to look at is the positive cable connection. The positive cable connection will look something like this. You see how it has that claw? And when you sit this on to the alternator, that claw has to fit in like that. You can't have it like this or any other way. It has to be seated into the position. So when the nut is tightened onto the stud, it does not damage this plastic, causing the positive terminal to become in contact with the casing and most likely will burn the alternator out. So here you see I have one with a different plastic connection. So you have to make sure that your wire, your positive cable wire, could fit perfectly onto this terminal without damaging its insulator. Another thing is, we want to make sure we turn the alternator onto the side, and you will have your regulator plug. This is also where the alternator receives its input voltage, and that input voltage is regulated to 7.25, and then it's generated to 14.5 at this terminal. So we also want to look at the pulley, make sure you have the same belt design and size. You also want to spin the alternator, make sure it rotates smoothly. Now let's get ready to install this alternator. This alternator is, let me take a close look at this terminal and this one. They're different, you see? So our positive cable, which looks like this, will never secure itself in something like that. So when you turn around this insulator, you notice that tab in the back? Well, that tab fits right down here. So it's secure. This one has the same thing. You see it has a tab in the back there. So that tab will sink right into that area. So this old one from the alternator, we're going to have to reuse it onto the new alternator, because it's very important that this positive cable here does not come in contact with the case of the alternator, and it does not break this plastic, because if it breaks the plastic, it's going to push the terminal over to touch the casing, and that could cause a short circuit on the alternator, leading to damage. So you need to take careful attention to that. This here is not for our application. This is for another type of wire terminal. Here's another important thing that you should know when installing this alternator. The minimum amperage is 100 amp. And this alternator for the 2003 Nissan Frontier and related model, the model number of this alternator is L as in Larry, R as in Ronald, 1100736. So that will be most likely a Mitsubishi model number. Another important thing is when you're going to install this area here up into the mount, you need to make sure you see this bushing right here. You see how it's flat on this side, and this side it's protruding. We need to push this back. So this side here could look like over here. So it looked like this. You want to have this clearance because this is where the bracket is going to fit for the mount. So if you have this bushing extending on this side, it will not allow the alternator to be fit up into its location. So this is something that you need to look out for. Most of the time on a new alternator, you will have this already done. Here we are in the engine compartment, and we want to take a look at where we're going to be mounting that alternator. That front bolt is going to go right here, and the rear bolt is going to go in the rear of that. But the first thing I want to do is I want to remove this oil sensor that I got from Glow Shift with the gauge. The sensor is leaking oil and it's dropping it onto this mount for the front differential. This is going to saturate into the rubber, and eventually the differential is just going to become dislocated in its position, and it's going to require this mount to be changed. So first I want to remove this, replace the factory original equipment, throw this in the garbage because it's from this company here, Glow Shift. I purchased a set of gauges from them. Turned out to be a fraud. It didn't work. It sent the wrong sending unit, so you need to look out for that. So let's get this out of the way, and then we can start with installing the alternator. You can see the belt is still dangling here. You did not have to take all those belts off. You just have to release it from the pulley. First thing first, before addressing or making any repair to an electrical component, remove the battery. Don't forget. This is that garbage sending unit from Glow Shift. This is an adapter that you need for placing this garbage into here, and then you could put your factory OEM sensor, oil pressure sensor, into here, and there's a plug here in case you need to use it for another sensor. But this side I believe have a metric thread, and on the gauge I think it's a 1/8, a quarter inch, I mean 1/4 or maybe 1/8, I'm not sure. But this is what you're going to need to install if you want to have a separate oil pressure gauge. Since the vehicle does not have an oil pressure gauge, it has an oil light. But I do not recommend it. You buy from these guys, these Glow Shift guys. This is all the garbage we purchased from them. This is an oil pressure gauge, a fuel pressure gauge, and a coolant temperature gauge. None of it work because they send us the wrong unit. And this is approximately $150 we have spent here with shipping for this garbage. So we're going to take this, just send it over there. Here's another one of that Glow Shift garbage. Here's another one of that Glow Shift garbage. And this here, as you can tell. So we can see we have successfully removed that contraption from Glow Shift, replacing the factory OEM oil pressure sensor and the plug. Now we want to take a look again at the alternator. And here you see we have a ground wire. This is going to go on the back of the case. This is the regulator plug. When you are to disconnect this plug, you have to make sure you press the tab in here and pull on the plug. Do not pull on the wire because the wire could become dislocated from the pin on the inside. This wire here is for the electric fan, the radiator fan, and this is the positive cable with that special 2-prong. See, it has that prong on it for it to be installed. Here's our fastener for that alternator. These 2 bolts here are for anchoring it to the engine, the mount. This one here is for the ground, and this one here is for the positive cable. On the threads of these bolts, these 2 bolts, I like to use something like this. It's a thread sealer, a Teflon paste you put on the threads so it does not become corroded later on when you need to remove the bolts or the nuts. It will not snap. The paste will preserve the threads, preventing them from becoming corroded. This is the bracket for the bottom of the alternator. This part goes in next to the crankshaft harmonic balancer, the pulley, and this is the part that adjusts the alternator. So, and this is the nut and bolt for holding the alternator to the adjuster and its bracket when you're finally making that adjustment. So the first thing we want to do is install the alternator, installing these two bolts for holding them into position. Let's take a look at that. Looking at the alternator from above, that's the front bolt into the alternator ear, alternate to its bracket. Let's take a look at the rear bolt of this alternator. In the wheel well area, you will be able to remove this splash guard that's here, and if you look right in there, you will be able to reach to the rear back here to get that bolt in location. So don't forget to move that bushing that's fitted into the alternator ear. You have to move it towards the back so this whole alternator could slide up into that part right there for catching that rear bolt and the front bolt. You could catch the rear bolt from this location between the rear well. It's a far reach, but you're better off on the vehicle from the rear of the alternator. You reach your hand up in there and you feel your way for fitting that bolt into position. Now the next thing is to replacing the regulator plug, installing this ground wire. This will go right here at the lowest part of the alternator right here, and then we have to focus on getting that red positive cable, like I showed you before, onto the terminal. To gain access to that rear bolt where you see the ratchet handle is hanging and the positive cable bolt, you're going to need to get it from through here. You're going to need to use both hands, accessing it from the rear of the alternator. You'll be able to get up in there. So you can see if I get my hands up in there. You can see the nut is on the cable, positive cable, and the ratchet is on the rear nut with a 12mm socket. Those two nuts above are going to be the last bolts, I should say, you're going to be tightening once you place the adjuster onto the alternator. So this is where I want to put the belt on. Making sure it's seated perfect in its groove. Now we could put on that bracket on the bottom for adjusting the alternator. Now, when installing this bracket, you want to make sure you catch this bolt onto the alternator with this adjuster, and you want to catch this 12mm bolt that goes into the engine block. This bracket, if you look at it, goes behind the pulley, and it is a very close tolerance, so you need to pay attention to that, making sure it's clearance for safety. Now, adjusting the belt, you're going to have to turn on this end here, and that is as much you want on the belt. You want to have about a 1/8 of a play on it. You don't want to tighten too much on the belt because you could wipe or damage the front bearing in the alternator. So once you have this adjustment on the belt, you will then take your tool and place it on this 12mm bolt and tighten it down to lock the adjustment. Once you have locked this adjustment, then you could go back to the top bolt on the alternator and tighten that bolt in the front and the one in the rear. Take careful attention in securing the wire, making sure they're not touching anywhere that could cause a shortage. Another important thing is, this is from between the wheel well. And when you look right here, you're going to see there is a clip for holding the harness, this loom, in position. It is very important that this wire is held in that secure position, because if this wire is to be dangling, it could come in contact with the steering shaft, the exhaust manifold. And another thing is, when you're getting your hands up in there, you have to look out for this heat shield. It's very sharp on the edge on the front area, so you don't want to get cut with it. So this has finalized our installation for the alternator. And another thing is, try not to drive the vehicle without the splash guard, because the water will splash up in here and get into the alternator and cause it to damage much earlier. So this is bring us to the end of installation of the alternator for the 2003 Nissan Frontier with a VG33E engine, and there you can see that's the brand new alternator. Okay, now we have the engine running with the battery installed. We want to check the charging volt, and we can see we're charging at 14, which says okay, it's good. As we start driving the vehicle, it's going to come up to around 14.5. It's going to adjust itself, because remember, the battery has to get recharged since it was drained from voltage. This complete our alternator installation. See the brand new alternator right there. Thank you for watching the video, and see you again on another video.